Hello, people. This is KP, and I'm back again. And there was just a few things that I had on my mind, and so I decided to come and make this video. And this one is going to be all about worth, value, and worthlessness. I got this topic after having a conversation with a good friend of mine about how people feel about themselves, uh, and how the way you feel about yourself affects you mentally, physically, and it causes a lot of problems. Can cause a lot of problems to some people that don't have a mind that's strong enough to handle the situation. First of all, I have to say this: when it comes to worthlessness, as a black man in America, we have been told from the very beginning that we are worthless. We don't have any value. And that was just part of the brainwashing situation that occurred during slavery, and it still goes on today. They tell you you're worthless, but in reality, when you first came here, you had worth, because as a slave, your worth was 10 times the value of a horse. So from 1525 to 1866, your value as a slave, and this is documented by measuringworth.com / slavery, that a slave's worth was worth, in today's dollars, $23,000 per slave. So back then there was like 4 million slaves between the time of 1525 to 1866 at a value of $3.5 billion. That was then. That was in those years from 1525 to 1866. We were worth $3.5 billion to the slave owners. Now, they told you time and time again, you're worthless, you're shiftless, you'll never amount to anything. But in reality, we were worth gold to them. And still, right to this day, we're still worth gold to them. And breaking it down for you, the way they make money off of us now is basically the new form of slavery, which is the prison industrial complex. The prison industrial complex is federal, state, and private prison industries. Now, they make a ton of money off of prisoners in more than one way, but today I'm just going to touch on how much money they make, and off of the value, off of what you do. So in other words, you have people that are locked up, that are incarcerated, that have jobs, that have actual jobs inside the penitentiary. Side note, a city like Detroit has a 35% unemployment rate on the streets, cats on the street. Now you go to jail, now all of a sudden that shifts over to 100% employment. So you go from 35% unemployment on the streets to 100% employment in prison, if you choose to do so. If you choose to not work, then basically that's when they separate you, lock you up in the hole, and they put you in a position where, like, okay, well, you're not following orders, so therefore we need to separate you from the ones that will work. Oh boy. So from the years of 1972 to the year 2000, 1972 was 300,000 inmates in all 50 states combined. In the year 2000, that had ballooned to 2 million. I believe it's creeping more toward 3 million now. I have to do a little more research on that. But from 1972 to the year 2000, you saying, well, what happened between those years? That's when the so-called war on drugs was created by Ronald Reagan. You know, and it's really ironic that that particular president would create the war on drugs when at the same time they were bringing drugs into the country, and you know, in mass numbers. We all know about the situation that happened with Freeway Rick, the Iran-Contra situation. Those things, they all tie in together, and I'm gonna tie them all in together here. Just say you go to the federal penitentiary, you go to jail, and you get caught with drugs. This is a war on drugs. A person in the inner city, minority, be it Hispanic, black, or poor white, that has 5 grams of crack. Under the federal mandatory sentencing laws, that you would get a mandatory 5 years without parole for having 5 grams of crack. This is directly targeted toward poor people. On the other hand, if you had 500 grams of powder cocaine, under the federal statutes, that equals a 5-year sentence. So the revolving door for poor people going back to jail for a smaller, just say 100 times smaller amount of a drug that's actually the same drug, because you can't have crack unless you have coke. You need coke, powder cocaine to make crack. They know that that crack is in the poor communities. They make it just an affordable drug in a sense that if you had $25 worth of powder and you used it, you would not get the same effect of $25 worth of crack. $25 worth of crack is way more powerful. But having said that, that discrepancy between those years, the amount of years that you would get for the same drug is so vast, it's unbelievable. And President Obama was trying to do some things about that, and he was able to actually lower the amount of time that people were getting sentenced for crack cocaine. He was actually able to lower those years. However, since Trump got in office and he had Jeff Sessions over there, Jeff Sessions went back and changed those laws, and he put them back on the books all the way. He put the 1980 laws back on the books. So here we go again. We are right back to where we were back in 1980. This is year 2019. So going from that, I'm moving on to the prison industry situation. Prison industries starts off as it started off way back in the 1800s, and actually after the extremely prevalent after the end of slavery, and the prison system was created specifically to put people back into slavery. And I would have to do a little more read it, but I believe either the 13th or the 14th Amendment to the Constitution stated that if you went to prison, you basically reverted back to being a slave again, because all of your rights were taken away. So that's in effect right to this day. So when you go to prison, and a lot of states are trying to do something about this for like people that are getting parole from prison, they want to try to make it like, okay, you get some of your rights back. At least you get back the right to vote. And I think California might be trying to work on that now. It's a couple on the East Coast that are trying to reinstate uh, parole prisoners' rights to vote. But for the most part, the majority of them still have that same law. It states, well, once you go to prison and you get out as a felon, you can't vote. Uh, so your rights are taken away once you go back to jail. Right? Once you go to prison, your rights are taken away, and you become basically a slave again. So therefore, they can use you any way they see fit. They can rent you out, have you working on farms, or making one of the thousands of products that the state and the federal penitentiaries and the private penitentiaries make. And it's not just license plates; it's tons of products that they make. On the federal level, and this is something I just found out, the federal prison industries, they use their inmates to create 90% of the items that the military uses. Like that goes from helmets to bulletproof vests to ID tags, clothes, pants, the uniform, boots. All those items are made in the prison, in the federal penitentiaries. And the list is longer than that. That was just some of the things. That was one of the topics that caught me off guard. I had no idea that the federal pen guys in the federal pen were making the products for the military. I thought since they had so many people, they made their own things. But I was wrong about that. On the state level, man, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable on the state level, the amount of products that are being made. Even in one item I found in the state of Utah, they actually have fish farms where they're growing tilapia, and they are growing tilapia from the baby fish all the way to the frozen product ready for the store. They're doing that in Utah state prison. So you have a worth. You have a worth. They tell you that you're worthless, but you have a worth. Now let's look at your value as far as they're concerned when it comes to prison industries. On the state level, you can make from 12 cents to 40 cents an hour doing the jobs, and these statistics may be off by a few pennies. On the federal level, you can make from 90 cents to $1.25 per hour on your job, which could be approximately about maybe $200, $300 a month on the federal level. So that value offset by how much money they spend on inmates. By the state, on the state level, they spend $51 billion a year to house the roughly 3 million inmates in the United States. And on the federal level, they spend $491 million per year housing federal inmates. Now, you can best believe that if they're spending $51 billion on the state level to house you, the state inmates, and $495 million on the federal level, that they're making 10 times that amount, maybe even 100 times that amount off of the inmates. And it's really, oh man, this right here is I'm gonna have to really come back and get a lot deeper into this subject. I was just laying some small levels of information that I just picked up, and I went online and I found a lot of this information. But the information about the value of the slaves I found at measuringworth.com. And if you Google the prison industrial complex, you will find page after page after page after page of information about the money and how much money that the federal government, private private-owned penitentiaries and the state penitentiaries make off the inmates. Uh, Two corporations on the private level. One is called GEO, that's GEO, and the second is called Corrections Corporation of America, which are the two largest private-owned penitentiary investors, and they make a profit on their own. Just two companies. They make $70 billion per year profit off of slave / prison labor. So they can't tell you you're worthless just by this little bit of information that I just gave you. That lets you know you have value in this country, but you are being exploited right back into slavery again. When you go to jail, prison, even jails, because jails will rent you out to and they'll shop you around. They'll ship you around to different locations. Say you got a city that's a small city, and they have a relatively large jail. Large cities will rent you out. They'll send you to those small cities, and those small cities will house you in their jails, and they'll make a certain amount of money per inmate for housing you. So the state, just like LA County, for instance, you got so many people in LA County is overcrowded conditions. And for a while, they were using the federal penitentiary up in Kern County. It's up there by Mojave. They used that for a while to house some inmates from the county. So, because the jail was empty. It was empty. They didn't have anybody in there. They did that for a while. I don't know if they still do it now, but I know that for a fact because I used to live not too far from there, from that area. But it's big business. This whole prison industries and this whole prison industrial complex is big business. They make a ton of money locking you up, keeping you locked up, keeping you going through that revolving door, because when you get right back out on the streets, it's not very many jobs for the average felon to get, because people don't want to hire you because you have a record. So you have to basically create your own opportunities in most cases, or you just stuck with a garbage dead end job. And sometimes even those garbage dead end jobs don't want you. So taking all this into consideration, just remember the next time you look at a news show on TV and they're showing people standing on the corners doing this and that. That all fits in. It all ties in together, because when you don't have a job, you're gonna do what you need to do to get that money. You want to try to feed your kids. You want to try to have some things in life, and sometimes it's not always available for you to actually get that job. So you're gonna do something to get that money, and that usually entails crime. You perpetrate some kind of crime to get that cash, and then that's when you're in the system. You're in the system, and the system, they're trying to they put it out there to the public, and everybody across the board in this country, every citizen in this country should be outraged at the fact that you have a high unemployment rate of people on the street, but you got 100% employment in prison. That should be an outrage right there. I mean, it should be the other way around. People on the street should be able to get the jobs, but they're farming out most of the work to the prisons, and the jobs on the streets don't exist. Like I said, I use Detroit as a perfect example. St. Louis is another one. So Baltimore, that's another one. And it's no coincidence that those particular cities that don't have the employment have the highest incarceration rates. Baltimore, Baltimore is one, and I think they kind of just surpassed, and they are like number one on the list of like murders. The last time I looked, I believe St. Louis is number two. Now you have a so-called idiot that for whatever reason decided he wanted to attack Chicago and put Chicago in the news. Like they're always talking about Chicago this, Chicago that, but really in reality Chicago is like on the list of violent cities. It's probably like ranked around maybe 8 or 9. Baltimore is number one, but because they ran him out of town when he tried to have his little rally, he took up a vendetta against Chicago and kept putting Chicago in the news like it was the worst city on the planet. The news media picked up on it and they just ran with it. So every time you talk about a crime statistic, the first city they put up is Chicago, and that's not the case. So look into these things that I just mentioned, and this is like video number 2, and I'm titling this video "The Lie About Value and Worthlessness." All right, peace out.